Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Classical Republican. We're going to be talking about Pietro Bembo. Now, he was a scholar, a poet, a cardinal, and a knight hospitaller. He was not terribly involved in Venetian politics. However, his father was, and he accompanied his father on a lot of business issues, we'll say. He lived from 1470 to 1547, and he wrote a book, The History of Venice, and I'm going to be reading from this tonight. It's the I Tati Renaissance Library from Harvard. So we're going to start. I got 3 volumes. 1, 2, 3. And this is it's kind of like the Leb Classics, where they have Latin on one side and the English translation on the other. And we're going to start here on page 67. And what the reason we're doing this is because he shows gives a lot of examples on how the Venetian government actually worked. And so a lot of hard concrete examples of what they were doing and what organs it went through, what bodies, the Grand Council, the Senate, or the Ten, or maybe the Doge. I don't think we're going to read any of those examples for the Doge, but what we have here is we see an alteration in the mechanics of voting to make it more secret and to avoid peer pressure. So it says here, a few months later, another law, which greatly benefited the city, was brought before the Great Council by the councillor Antonio Tron. His law on casting votes soon put an end to abuses in the election of magistrates, which had become, by now, intolerable. The system of voting in place up to that time was as follows. With the citizens seated on benches, 2 boxes of turned wood, each a foot high, were brought in, one green, the other white. The upper part of the boxes was open, and they spread out so that a hand could be put in, while in the middle they contracted to a narrow passage so that only a single ballot could get further inside, while also making it much hardier to pick up and carry around. Much handier to pick up and carry around. The bottom could hold a great many votes and could be removed and replaced. So it's kind of like an hourglass shape, as it was when the votes were counted. Each voter would cast his ballot into his preferred urn. The ballot itself was a little ball the size of a small cherry and made of cloth. So I have one here. Right there. And I think these would be small cherries because, we've kind of fattened up our cherries over the centuries, and now I think they would have been a little, like on the small side, like tart cherries are today. The ballot itself, we read that already. By law, the voters would put their hands into both urns with fists clenched, again to make it impossible to know in which urn the ballot had been left. The balls that were cast into the white urn represented votes for the candidate, those in the green ones against. Although this system had been set up long before, electoral fraud, to which every Republican history has obviously been exposed, had become so outrageous that someone who favored the election of one of his followers would take the ball in his fingers and openly cast it into the white urn and demand that those around him should do the same. They in turn would fear the resentment of the candidates and would cast their votes in full view, not usually following their own judgment, but in order to curry favor. And so it came about that men who were not worthy of it were often preferred to citizens who had served the Republic well, simply because they had greater influence thanks to their wealth or family or patronage in general. They won the magistracies, while good men were spurned and rejected. Numerous laws in the past had done nothing to counter this pernicious evil and eradicate it from civic life. It was only with the passing of Antonio Tron's legislation that integrity and honor were restored to the citizens. Okay, so what they're doing is you have these two of the urns, and what happens is you imagine they're hourglass, and you have to, and I can stick my whole hand in. I have to stick both hands in, so you can't see my fists. They're in the can, and I open them up both at the same time and lift them out, showing that there is no ballot in my hand. So what was going on was people were saying, "Hey everybody, I'm gonna vote this way, and so should you." So, and that was against the norms. They should not have been doing that, but they were, and there wasn't really any way to stop them from that sort of behavior until Antonio Tron. His plan was that the two urns, which it had hitherto been customary to have carried around open and uncovered by two civil servants, should be covered in their upper part and joined together side by side. He made a single opening in the urns, thus connected and welded together towards the side of the top coverings. And around it, he put a projecting cuff the width of half a palm, so obscuring the openings to the insides of the boxes. Through this tube, a hand could be inserted and easily turned toward either of the boxes. Another feature was that the first of the two urns, the one placed next to the cuff, was the one whose ball rejected candidates. But this device, Tron intended that if a man was compelled to vote for someone against his will, he could secretly open his fingers and drop the ball in the near compartment, as he extended his hand through the mouth of the tube towards the far one, the one whose votes elected a magistrate. In this way, the citizens could pretend to do one thing and not the other, and so actually bring about what each of them wanted. Nor could what they had done be detected or discovered. Thenceforth, the citizenry always used this procedure in the Great Council and in appointing magistrates in the Senate and the Council of Ten, its decisions free of favor or spite. In capital cases and all other judicial proceedings, however, they brought in an additional third urn, so that if someone was undecided, he might place his vote there. They resolved to keep this urn separate and unconnected to the other two. Okay. So here we are, and I've kind of fashioned one here. So you would have the green and the white, and you'd be able to put your hand in and you couldn't really tell when you had dropped it. And I also have this cloth to cover it up so no one can really see the movement. And so you put your hand in. Are you voting for the first one or the second one? You can't really tell when I drop it. But if I drop it in the first one and take my hand to the second one, you still can't tell where I dropped it. And there you have it. All right. So that was a innovation in secret balloting. Now, in book 2, we'll move on to book 2, you see that we have some emergency taxes. So, in the second volume on page 5, they're at war. This is during the Italian Wars, and they need funds. So, these measures taken for a war, which seems set to be the greatest and most fearful of all that the city had engaged in with the Turks, led the Senate to increase taxes on the citizens by a third, excepting only the tariffs on wine, bread, and meat. And a law was passed requiring all urban and provincial magistrates to return to the Republic half a year's salary, though the courts of the 40 were exempted from the provisions of the law. Men were also chosen to levy an assessment based on the wealth of each individual citizen. The assessment thus determined would be freely given to the Republic by every citizen so long as it did not exceed half an ounce of gold. Anything above that amount would be paid over as a loan, though no citizen's assessment was to exceed 3 gold pounds. Okay. Now, oops. Let me turn the pages here. Let's go to page 35, and we see the eradication of quid pro quo or bribery. Now, the laws for the election of magistrates in the Great Council require that those drawn by lot for the task of proposing the name of some citizen for elevation to public office in the vote should nominate only the best citizens. And yet, some of the richer sort of citizens were in the habit of making a gift to those who had chosen them for election, so that they would be readier to nominate them in the future. Now that would be very difficult, because we know how difficult it is to get somebody in to one of their nominating committees. I remember referencing back to my Contarini video, and it would be very difficult to get somebody, because they're chosen by random, to get onto the nominating committee. So it would just everyone would have to know that if you nominate this guy, he's going to give you something. So following these events, at the end of the summer, the 10 passed a law. Anyone who gives or donates money or anything else to anyone who has chosen him to be put to the vote in the election of magistrates shall be exiled to whatever island the 10 choose. If he leaves that place and is captured, he shall live out the rest of his life in the city's foulest prison. The Council of 10 may not impose a lesser penalty except by unanimous vote, and whoever wishes to do so shall be fined 10 gold pounds. Okay, so that's pretty serious, but I guess it was getting to be a serious problem that the Council of 10 had to step in. Okay, next on page 251, here are some examples of some passages that kind of explain the powers of war and peace that the Senate have. And so, whether it was by chance, by fortune, or by the will of Almighty God, who brought the wealthy, splendid, illustrious, and powerful republic, the ill will of neighboring rulers, so that in her adversity the minds of men could learn that a state, an empire that had grown continuously for more than 1,080 years, could be savagely crushed and brought low in the space of a single day, the senators now laid aside all hope of peace and turned with stout hearts to beating back the war. The Senate therefore immediately ordered the heavy cavalry to be increased to 10,000, the light cavalry to 3,500, 2,000 of them to be stratiots, and 13,000 infantry recruited. Then, too, to guard against the king's making a move by sea, they passed a measure to have 15 galleys, 4 of them bastarde, fitted out in Venice, which means a really big ship, in Venice and on the island of Crete, and joined the rest of the fleet. The 10 also sent Andrea Badoer, who had spent many years on the island and understood the language, to the King of England with a view of seeking an alliance with him. Okay, so they're raising forces, they are building ships, and it says in Venice and on the island of Crete. There was also an arsenal on the island of Crete. It didn't make as many ships as the one in Venice, but it was still did a lot of service to Venice. Okay, and meanwhile, Janus Lascaris, the French king's ambassador also bade the senators farewell and left the city for France. At the end of January, Antonio Condulmer, the Republic's ambassador, was likewise told to return home by the king's ministers in France, having first been presented by them with a gold necklace as a gift in the king's name. But declaring that he had no need of gifts from an enemy's king, Condulmer rejected the necklace and took to the road. Okay, so there we see the powers of the Senate. Okay, then we go on to 265, and here's some more ideas about taxes, emergencies, of course. On the home front, the senators were growing concerned about how to raise funds for the war. In addition to other revenues, they passed a decree to have the magistrates in the city return to the Republic their entire pay for 6 months. Okay, so that was that's a common thing at this time. You see them giving up half their pay or all their half their pay for an entire term. Okay, this last did not apply to the officials of the Court of Authority, who were only to contribute half their pay, as they had no other source of income. Provincial magistrates and commanders of fortresses this side of the Quarnaro Gulf would remit half their pay to the Republic, in other respects being bound by the same law as the urban magistrates. Of all these magistrates, urban and provincial, the legal advisors and secretaries and officials were also to give the Republic not only half their pay, but also half of their revenues, with the exception of the magistrates of Verona, Brescia, Bergamo, Crema, and Cremona, and likewise those of Romagna, and those who were sent out beyond the Gulf of Quarnaro. All of them were to give only a quarter on both accounts, seeing that the war itself would bring great hardship to the first group, and the long and difficult journey had already done so for the second, so as to ensure that they would not be disadvantaged in the same degree as the rest when they already had to bear these added burdens. After the Senate had passed the law as mentioned above, the Great Council in session 3 days later also enacted it with equal dispatch. A measure was also passed to the effect that if those in exile for voluntary manslaughter served in the Republic's forces for 4 months at their own expense and supported 4 men to fit to bear arms, they would have their exile quashed. Okay, so these are very dire times, and they're coming up with anything to get more soldiers out there onto the battlefield to fight the enemy. Okay, next we have, we're in volume 3, page 3. So after Padua was retaken, Mancelis, Este, and a good many other towns in the territory of Padua returned to the Republic with little difficulty. Maximilian, who's the Holy Roman Emperor at this time, was then at Marostica, a town in the foothills of the Alps, 24 miles from Padua, and left at once for Trento for fear that he would be cut off. The Senate decided to have the senators choose 6 reliable commoners to guard the 6 gates of Padua, each with 30 soldiers. And because the men of the countryside had shown great devotion toward the Republic, they gave them immunity from taxation for 5 years, and even let them off the debts they owed to the treasury. Okay, so a lot of carrot and sticks going on here. And here we'll see defense and the powers of eminent domain by the Senate. The proveditors had no opportunity of destroying the Carthusian monastery, but when the Senate learned that it had been of great utility to Maximilian, and had been as good as a defensive stronghold for him, and also that the profusion of the trees had often hidden the enemy from the Republic soldiers and protected them from artillery fire, they passed a decree that all buildings should be razed to the ground by their owners, and trees of all sorts cut down for 1.5 miles in every direction from the gates and walls around Padua. Bricks, tiles, marbles, ironwork and wood, both dry and green, were to be taken away wherever they liked, and anyone who failed to do so within a prescribed period would have all such possessions confiscated by the treasury. The chief thing they wanted was to have the flat ground remain bare and empty of anything that afforded shade and offered solid resistance, so that if Padua were laid under siege again, an enemy would find no natural advantages or protection. And this law has remained ever afterwards sacrosanct and inviolate right up to the present day. Okay, so here you have some examples. So I read a lot of Contarini's, and that wasn't a lot of history. That was a lot of theory about how Venice worked, and so that was and so today I'm reading Pietro Bembo, History of Venice, so we can see how it actually worked in practice. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you're interested, you can Google the Itati Renaissance Library. They have a lot of good Renaissance, rather lesser known Renaissance stuff that's being translated into English for the first time. So it's really good. You could go there and search it. They're kind of expensive. They're more expensive than Lep Classics, and you can but you can find them used also for a little cheaper. That's all I have today from the Classical Republican. Long live the Republic!